Welcome to one more edition of Politics and Random. Egberto, Willies, your host. Growing up as the youngest of three sisters in Colon, Panama, Stacy Allen Barrow learned the importance of using her voice early. She is a graduate of Howard University School of Law and served in various legal roles, including her current position as a felony associate judge in Harris County. She has handled numerous high-profile cases and maintained a reputation of fairness. She is dedicated to community service, particular in supporting at-risk youth. Welcome to Politics Done Right, Judge Stacy Allen Barrow. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, and it's such an honor to be with you, a fellow Panamanian, and we have so much in common already, and you're doing a really amazing job of trying to empower people with information so they can make their own choice and let their voices be heard at the polls and overall within our political atmosphere. So thank you for having me.
Well, another judge that I met, actually, she's a good friend. She told me that there was this judge that she thought was Panamanian. And I think she knew you were Panamanian. She said, thought was Panamanian. And she said, you've got to talk to her. And I'm like, a Panamanian judge? And I thought, it's going to be from La Ciudad, La Capital. I thought it was going to be from the capital city or whatever. And then she said, when I read all your stuff, it's like, she's from Colon, Panama. That's where I'm from,
Yes, Colones.
Somos colonenses, but, it's great. You don't know, first of all, how honored I am and proud I am of having a fellow colonense from Panama that is a judge here in a criminal judge here in Harris County. It is, I'm beaming with pride that one of our own is in the legal system. And I really wanted to talk to you about not all of our Panamanianness, but I wanted to talk about some serious issues that are occurring here in Texas and beyond. But before we go any further, you are, in fact, I think your term is up and you are running again for the position?
Well, so 2.5 years ago, February 2022, I was appointed along with two others to serve as a felony associate judge in Harris County Criminal Courts. We were brought on as an effort to lower the backlog of cases that we heard about that really started with Harvey and were only made worse by our collective quarantine experience because of COVID-19. So you can imagine if the courts are closed, we're not trying cases. And so the numbers were looming. And so Commissioner's Court funded these positions. I applied, I interviewed, and a supermajority of the current elected judges voted me in to this position. As an associate judge, I do pretty much everything that a current sitting judge does. I make the tough bond and bail hearing decisions. I handle motions to adjudicate guilt and motions to revoke probation. I had one, in fact, today that I took care of. Handle motions to suppress. I also handle a lot of post-conviction writs, which is when someone is appealing their case after being convicted, and it's really their last bite of the apple. And I've handled well over 50 of those matters that have gone before the Court of Criminal Appeals. In each case, they have agreed with my findings, and I've had the blessing of even granting people relief, meaning that these people get a new trial because they didn't get a fair trial the first time. And so my powers are vast. I pick a lot of juries. I presided of over over 1,500 different felony cases so far as an associate judge. And so there are some differences, but for the most part, the powers that I have are the same as an elected judge. And now, having that experience over the last 2.5 years, I'm bringing that experience to this current race for the 487th Criminal District Court here in Harris County, which is a new court, along with two others that will be on the ballot that was created in the last legislative session.
Did they create that because they had a shortage of judges pretty much, so they needed to enhance the amount of criminal judges they had in Harris County?
Yes. So the new bench was created in order to continue as an effort to help with the backlog of cases, because based on the data, because of the size of our county and the massive amount of growth we've had in recent years, we just don't have the judicial infrastructure to keep up. And so this is one of those efforts to help with the backlog of cases. The work I do now is precisely why I was appointed 2.5 years ago. And now the new court is in line with that effort as well.
Now so you're running now in the 487th, which is a new court that was created. Tell us a little bit about, is this a statewide job, a countywide job? Exactly what jurisdictions do you have?
Yeah, so the jurisdiction includes any felony matter that could come before the court that's charged within Harris County. So the way that judges get their cases, especially in criminal courts, but all throughout the different jurisdictions, it's a randomized system. So as a case comes in, the case is given out to the different courts. We have 26 courts now. And so in criminal courts and the felony courts. And so it's divvied up between those courts. So that's how I would receive cases. So any felony matter that is charged within Harris County could potentially come before my court. And for your audience, and I'm certainly not saying that they don't know this, but I think it's helpful that a felony is essentially anything that is punishable by up to from a year up to the death penalty. So the most serious of offenses.
Now, and these don't they also have a limit or a starting limit in the amount of money that was, if it's theft or whether it's over $200 or something like that? That's usually a felony versus a misdemeanor, or
in terms of what is the question?
Like, let's say I committed a robbery or something like that. Is there a cutoff between when it's a felony and when it's a misdemeanor?
Yes. So the offenses, as I mentioned, are felony cases. So the way that you know you're in felony court is that the jurisdiction is the punishment range is for anything punishable by 1 year and all the way through the death penalty. So the most serious of offenses. Anything else in terms of county time, you're looking at anything that's up to 1 year in county jail. We're looking at prison time for the most part when you're coming up to felony court.
Now, and given that what you're dealing with are criminal issues, I think I've said this for a long time. I think the way one was reared, the one's social experiences, one personal experiences should matter in these cases. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what gives you the ability to empathize with, from the richest person that come into your court to, let's say, the poorest person that come into your court?
Well, I like to say that, I'm not a politician. I'm a public servant at heart. And ultimately, I'm running for this bench because as a public servant, I am bringing a community-centered mindset to the justice system. And that is something that I have cultivated my entire life. If my mom was on the Zoom, she'll let you know when I was a little girl growing up in Panama, that my favorite phrase at the age of 3 was, yo tengo no me tengo derecho de hablar, right? Mm-hmm. Like, don't tell me to be quiet. I have a right to speak, because I was the youngest of 3 and I was constantly trying to raise my voice. And so I've always had a sense of knowing that my voice mattered and that there was something powerful about the way that I was able to communicate with people. And so that's something that I cultivated throughout my education and time at Howard University. And when I came back to practice law, I've been licensed for over 13 years. I continue to cultivate that. And I'm someone who is community-centered and deeply committed and connected to community. For 8 years, in recent years, I volunteered as a youth minister at my church, no pay, because I wanted to invest back in a community that I felt invested so much in me. And I felt that at a minimum, what I could help create was a safe space for young people to just be and figure things out. Because so often when I was a criminal defense attorney and going to court, I was representing very young people who find themselves trapped in the system. And I understood that for the grace of God, there go I. And I had young people who themselves were finding themselves teetering within the worlds of criminality and sometimes getting in trouble. And there was this window we could kind of try to pull them in. And I bring that to the bench because when I see someone in court, I don't see them as a mere cause number. They're just not another data point for me. They're a human being who has parents, who comes from a community, whether they're the person who is the victim or someone who finds themselves accused. And so there's a consequence that goes beyond just the person immediately in front of me. It goes on through the community that they're connected to. And here's an example. There was a young man who was in front of me, and I think he was charged with aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. And the offense underlying it was pretty heinous as it was alleged, right? But one thing that his attorney told me that I will always remember and kind of demonstrates this is he said, if there is a neighborhood that his absence will impact, he lives among a lot of elderly people on his street. And he's the one who goes over, mows their lawn, brings in their mail. And that might seem really small, but if you're somebody on a fixed income and you can't even afford the dignity of making sure that your lawn is mowed and you have access to your mail, that young man's absence matters. And granted, that's just one of many factors I have to consider. but it just demonstrates that there's more to people than what shows up on a page, and you have to be a critical thinker. Listen, I live in the inner city. I've had to find and sign warrants for houses that are just 5 blocks away from me. So I understand everybody's concern about safety. I pass that house and that street every day as I'm heading home. But I understand also the beauty and the brilliance that lives in my neighborhood. I love my neighbors. They're all hardworking. There's some young people who live on this street who ride their bikes, who told me the other day when my family was here during the storm and so they didn't have lights, rang my doorbell and say, hey, miss, somebody's trunk is open in your front yard, right? Like, these are regular people who are also doing really positive things. And so I know the tension that both good and bad can come from a certain place. And so what I bring to the bench is the understanding of nuance. As an immigrant, having gone through the immigration system, even though me and my family were trying to do everything right, it was not easy navigating it. It felt very vulnerable. So I understand what it's like to go into a system seeking justice. And because you're in a vulnerable population and posture, you're not always met with that. You're not always treated like a human being. And so I have never forgotten who I am and whose I am and where I come from. And I bring that to the bench to bring dignity and to ensure that no matter what I do, people feel fully seen, feel fully heard, and they feel respected no matter what the result is.
As a Black Latina, it's interesting because you bring a necessary intersectionality, not only with the Black and Latino population, but even with the white population, which is where, a whole lot of the judges lie. I think it's important for, first of all, what you spoke about there was very empathetic. And I think it's what we need in judges. I'm going to segue to bail in a minute, but I want to take a closer look at this. There are certain cultural issues based on Latinidad, based on Blackness, based on all these issues that sometimes having judges that don't understand these concepts would give sentences that defy cultural issues that should be taken into account. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that with regards to how you make judgments?
Yes, I think what you said is so important in terms of what we statistically see as the communities that bear the impact of these decisions. And prior to taking the bench, I did criminal defense as well as civil litigation. And the vast majority of my clients were people of color, specifically Black and Latino people. And so I had a lens of that already. But when you take the bench and you're not just focused on this particular case, you really get a bird's eye view of how systemic these concerns are very quickly. And so as I was sitting, and I've been sitting as a judge, I just immediately noticed every day that I sat on docket and handled matters, just how many people before me were really young, were Black, were Latino, or other, folks of color. And I understood that if we were not careful, we could potentially lose an entire generation, mostly Black and Latino young people, to the criminal justice system and to our prison system. And that's why it's really careful to be mindful of when you're making decisions, not to use a hammer when an Allen tool would do, right? That's what we're really looking at. And I think the way that you start to get at is, one, making sure that you're not so caught up in getting through your cases that you forget the humanity behind your cases, but also taking the time to listen and allowing the parties to be heard. There were multiple times when I was a defense attorney where there was a point that I wanted to make or some information that I wanted to share with the courts. And ultimately, the judge just did not want to give the time of day to hear so I could make this person fully human to them. So they weren't just a number on the page. And so for me, one of the things I'm known for is taking the time to listen to both sides, to both perspectives, and trying to understand, what does justice look like for them? What is going to help make the parties most whole in the situation, even if that is not what is normative for other communities and other cultures? So listening is at the key of it. And as I mentioned earlier, having gone through a system and felt silence often, I'm just keen on always making sure that people are heard, because that's where the nuance lives. that makes the difference between this person's aggravated robbery and this person's aggravated robbery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just criminal history. And in fact, the codes compel us to do that work and often give us a broad range of punishment and discretion, because I think the legislatures even understand that there's no space for a cookie cutter approach with such different people from different backgrounds, from different neighborhoods and different circumstances.
Interestingly, sadly, there are people who push a message of punitive sentences in all regards, forgetting that, if you're not going to have capital punishment that get rid of everybody that you throw in jail, if jail and prison doesn't become a place of rehabilitation, what happens when they come back into society? And we are bearing the brunt of a whole lot of that. Now, earlier, I wanted to jump into bail, because the bail system has been misrepresented entirely. One, I want people to first realize that let's note that the bail system wasn't designed by judges. It was actually designed by the state legislature. And therefore, anything that you may think is wrong about the bail system belongs at the state legislature. But that said, why don't you give us give us a little synopsis of what is so misleading, of the hyperbole that occurs when you have somebody come out on bail and commit a crime, as if there aren't other crimes being committed by people that just got by.
Yes. So as I have gone out to the community, especially running for judge, the issue of bail comes up quite often. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, from the general community in terms of understanding what a judge can and can't do when someone comes before them. And it's not necessarily folks' fault, right? Oftentimes when things are reported, there's not a lot of educational components around them to understand what is going on and what the law says. So the law says that folks who come to court who are accused of a crime are presumed to have the right to bail. All right. And there are very few exceptions where I, as a judge, am permitted to deny someone bail. And in just about all of those instances, it requires due process, meaning we have to have a hearing. So what has to happen is that the state of Texas, represented through the prosecutors, have to bring to my attention the fact that this person is situated in a way where I am permitted to deny them bail. Typically, these are people who are already on bond and now have picked up a new charge. They typically have to file a motion so that the other side has notice that this allegation is being made, that this person is someone who is situated to be denied bail. And then we have to have a hearing where the state has to present sufficient evidence, typically by a preponderance of the evidence, so it's less than beyond a reasonable doubt, that I can hold this person at zero bail until their trial. If there is a situation where the state never files the motion and says, Judge, we don't want to proceed with what's called, in most instances, an 11B hearing, meaning the Texas Constitution, Article 1, 11B sets out in that section instances where someone who is on bail, now having violated the conditions of bond, in most instances alleged to have committed a new crime, can be held at zero bail. So if that motion is never filed, I can't do it. And if it's filed and then the state decides, Judge, we're not going to proceed with the hearing, instead we want to argue for sufficient bail, then at that point, we're just discussing an amount. I am no longer have the power to hold that person at zero bail. So I think the public perception, as it's been told to me by a number of people, is that, well, this person was charged with this offensive murder, so that means they automatically should not get bail. Well, no, the law still says that they have a presumption of bail unless the Constitution sets out in one of the enumerated ways, and it's about 3 different ways in the Constitution under 11A, 11B, and 11C, where they can be held at zero bail. And unless the state takes action under one of those statutes, and there's a couple others that you can take action under, then I can't hold them at zero bail. We're just talking about how much money we should set bail.
When you say hold them at zero bail, you're talking about they don't get bail at all, right?
They don't get bail at all. right?
Okay.
So it has a zero there. And so the person is being detained in custody until their trial. And people also have to remember that when someone comes in front of me, they are constitutionally presumed innocent. And so that is likely why the legislature, in its wisdom, has set up these parameters that if you are going to go against this constitutional protection, right, federally and statewide, that this person is presumed innocent, if we're going to rebut that presumption, then we have to have due process. We need to have a hearing. And here are the instances where we think that's appropriate. I believe there are other states where, for certain offenses, people can be held at zero bond. But that's not what we have here, right? So if it doesn't fit within those guidelines, I cannot be above the law and do something that's extrajudicial and violates the same constitutions I'm required to uphold. Ultimately, my fidelity is to the law, even if there's a situation where the result may make me uncomfortable, I have to follow the law.
Now, Miss Judge Barrow, I know you can't get political, but I do need to get political at this point in this discussion. Republicans in our legislature have constantly given information to the media and otherwise to give you the impression that Harris County judges are somehow lenient on criminals or somehow allowing criminals to get on the streets. That is the tenet that they put out there. The responsibility of bail was designed by these same legislatures who also partake within the Constitution that created the policies that these judges must follow. If you have an issue with bail, and this goes with with several of these people out there that I hear talking on the right and a few in the middle, if they have a problem, the legal way, the constitutional way to do it is in Austin. Not the judges, for anybody who took basic political classes. Judges simply interpret the law. They interpret the law. I digress. Please continue, my friend.
No, I certainly can't comment on anything that you said, but I have told people, if you don't agree, for instance, with the range of punishment when I'm picking juries, or don't believe that the system that we have is one that leads you to feel safe, take those feelings and lobby your legislatures. Let the people who represent know how you feel. That is your right. That's not me advocating for any position, because I'm not allowed to do that. But I think it's important for people to know, in systems that often make people feel disempowered, that there are ways that they can let their voices be heard. But ultimately, as you mentioned, as a judge, my job is to interpret the laws. I don't make laws. I help do my part to enforce them in a way that is fair and equitable and just.
Well, look, Judge Barrow, this has been very educational. Like I said, I'm very impressed with the information that you've given to both myself and the audience. I always ask one last question, and that is, what should I have asked you that I didn't?
Well, I will make a plug during this time for people to do similar to what I just mentioned, which is to engage the systems that impact their lives. As you know, right now we are in the midst of an election process. And of course, I want people to go out and vote, get registered, and vote for me, Stacy Allen Barrow, Barrow, your choice for the 487th Criminal District Court. But I want people to engage the political system, because your vote is your voice. And so I want to share some important dates that are coming up. October 7th, which is right around the corner. We're already in August, and I can't even believe it. October 7th is a deadline to register to vote here in the state of Texas and throughout the nation, quite frankly, to have enough time to be able to vote in the general election, which will include everything from the president all the way down to my seat, all the way past me. So below the ballot, below my race, is the race for the district attorney. So as a judge, I can do all the things that I want to do, including looking at our probation system and connecting people with actual resources, such as job resources and community-based resources. So even when they're done with probation, they have the type of support that they need. But it's up to the district attorney to agree to a plea agreement that includes probation. It is up to the district attorney to dismiss cases. And so there's a lot of checks and balances within the courts So if you don't vote all the way down the ballot, to me, you're going to miss the district attorney's race, right? And we all have a role to play in the system. So go register to vote. You can visit www.harrisvotes.com in order to figure out and confirm if you're registered to vote, where to register to vote so your voice can be heard. And then again, as I mentioned, you got to cast your vote and not just go and vote for the presidential race, which gets the most publicity, but you have to vote all the way from the White House through the courthouse. The lower on the ballot, the closer to home, the more impact we have on your everyday lives. I tell people all the time, you're more likely to come in front of me as a judge than you are to even meet your state representative, let alone the president. And so the folks who have the most contact with you have the most impact on you. So it's very important to vote for judicial candidates. And I have to make a plug for my own campaign. Again, a lot of attention goes to presidential campaigns, and people forget that the same energy that they're putting into those campaigns need to be put into local races, including judicial races. And so I would ask people to go to my website, stacyforjustice.com, to learn more about my campaign and to consider donating or even volunteering for my campaign. Every dollar that you give to my campaign can go far because I'm nimble. I'm already on the ground. I'm connected to your community. And so I know how to stretch those dollars to help get your seniors and your young folks and everybody in between out to the polls and engaged in this process, not just this election cycle, but beyond. I'm on social media everywhere, including on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, at Stacy for Justice. So it's consistent across. And so let's keep in touch. Let's keep the conversations going and reach out to me if you're having a community event. I'm happy to come out and meet and greet people. I think it's important for people in public office to meet folks wherever they are. And I've crisscrossed throughout the county from Barrett Station to Kingwood to Humble, bringing my message of connected community perspective of justice to the bench everywhere that I can. So if there's an opportunity to come out to your community, I'm happy to do that.
Judge Stacy Allen Barrow, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right. It's been my honor to have you, especialmente que eres panameña.
Claro que sí, mucho gusto, and thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a true honor.
Thank you.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.